series on SEO secrets for the enterprise program. My name is Ryan Gibson, and we're really glad to have you here today. Throughout the webinar today, you'll be able to follow the conversation on Twitter as well, at Rem Kaufman, #TechSEO. So for those of you who aren't familiar with RKG, we're a data-driven online marketing agency. We focus on paid search, SEO, social media management, data-driven performance display, comparison shopping engines and feeds, and tie those all together with attribution management. But today we're going to focus on SEO. And to talk about a lot of that today, joining me is Adam Audette, the Chief Knowledge Officer of RKG. Welcome, Adam. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, and so when we're talking about technical SEO, that's really the core building block and the starting point for a lot of SEO programs, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's a foundation for sure.
Great. So why don't we go ahead and jump into it?
Perfect. Thanks, Ryan. And thanks, everybody, for joining. We've got some good stuff for you guys. We have a lot of tactical stuff, about 8 or 9 subject areas on technical SEO, and really kind of getting into the hardcore stuff like faceted navigation and pagination and duplicate content and all kinds of stuff like that. But before hitting that stuff, we wanted to sort of set the table on why technical SEO is important. So just running through a couple things. One is this idea of impact versus reliability, which I'll talk to first. And then secondly, talking about how and why to build a business case for technical SEO recommendations, whether you're in-house or at agency or consultant or whatever, how important that is to justify your work. So, and then after that, we'll run into kind of getting into rolling up our sleeves and getting into the tactics in a big way. So when we think about SEO, there's so many things that as SEOs we have to do. We have off-page stuff and link building and social, and we've got on-page stuff and content, and technical is certainly a part of that. And so I think it's really important to be strategic in how we think about link building and how we think about technical and all these different things. And to start with link building and social, and I promise this presentation is about technical SEO, link building and social have a high potential impact. So in other words, we could do link building work and we could just hit it out of the park, and we could get hundreds of links, and something could even go viral and really catch on. Of course, that's not a reliable thing that we can count on, but it's a the potential is very, very high. The dependability of it is pretty low because we're not sure if we're going to hit it out of the park. We're not sure if we're going to get hundreds of links. A lot of it depends on execution, and it also just depends on how popular something can be. So it's not something that's super reliable. So on the other hand, technical SEO, relative to what's possible with link building and social, it has a lower potential impact. We have seen in the past, working with a client, seeing incredible lift from just technical SEO work. But generally speaking, it's lower potential impact. But the thing about it is it's very dependable and very reliable. It's something we can always do to move the needle for a site. So it's really important in that way. And if you look at it, so there's this triangle of work, and you've got off-page at the top, which is very high impact potentially, but it has that lower dependability. And then there's on-page work, which is, it's technical, it's also content and stuff like that. That has generally very high dependability but lower impact. And just the thinking here is that when you're thinking about all the different things you have to do and how you prioritize things, the reason technical SEO is so important is because it's got that great dependability. It's something that always works. Okay, next I want to talk about justifying our recommendations. One of the things I think that we need to do in the SEO industry is, as in-house, as on the agency side, we need to do a better job of justifying our work. And I'll talk about why. So you might go up to a client or your in-house and go to your team and say, hey, we need to change our URLs, or we need to work on changing our internal navigation and some big stuff. And they say, okay, why? And you say, well, because it's good for SEO. And they say, okay, well, what's that going to be worth to us? What's that mean in terms of revenue? And this is where often we see companies fall short, is they say, well, I'm not really sure. And that's okay, because a lot of SEO is a finger in the wind. It's also based on hunches, and it's based on experience. But the more that we can justify our work, the better we're going to be in a lot of different ways. So how do you do that? Well, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Basically, what you want to do is you want to multiply the number of pages that will be impacted by your recommendations by something. So it could be your average conversion percentage. It could be average revenue per page. It could be something like average leads per visit, or whatever that important metric is for you within your company. So here's an example of how we could do it. Say we're an e-commerce site. It's a big site, and we have this really big SEO idea for product pages. And we say, okay, this is going to impact all of our product pages. So when we look at the traffic profile of the site, product pages get about 10% of the daily organic traffic. So that's 10,000 visits in this example. We know that our average conversion rate is about 3.8%. And we know the average order value is $72. We say, okay, this big idea we have, it's going to give us at least a 20% lift in organic traffic to these pages. Therefore, the product pages will get 2,000 more daily visits. That will mean 76 new daily conversions, or $5,472 in new daily revenue. Great. That means this change will create $164,160 in new monthly revenue. That is incremental. This is the kind of thing that really gets CMOs excited and gets people within an organization excited. But here's the thing with it. If you're going to hang your hat on a projection like this, you have to be pretty confident in what you're recommending. This does a great job of focusing priorities, and you're giving kind of backbone, as it were, to your recommendations. And it may be that you make a recommendation and you say, hey, this is going to give us this great upside in revenue, and it doesn't happen. And that's okay. I mean, I think the key is that, if we don't justify what we're doing in this way and go through a disciplined approach about it, it's going to be hard to get those resources. And limited resources is certainly the #1 problem within organizations when it comes to execution. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of technical stuff for you guys. We're going to run through these topics: canonical signals, pagination. I'll let you guys read through that. And we're just going to go through them one by one and get into kind of the tactical stuff here. Let's start with canonical signals. So one of the things that we see often is that a company will use a canonical strategy, which is a good idea, but those canonical tags that they use on their pages are outside of their internal link profile. So, for example, LL Bean has these nice canonical tags like this one on their product pages, and that's the canonical tag down below there for double L chinos. But that URL doesn't actually exist anywhere in the link profile. Another problem is that self-referencing canonical tags points to a non-canonical version. So it's a good idea generally for Google to, less so for Bing, I don't think they follow these quite as closely. It's a good idea for Google to apply self-referencing canonical tags on pages. But when you do that, that self-referencing canonical tag should point to the actual canonical. As you can see in this case, what's in the red there is a duplicate version of that URL. So it's a self-referencing canonical tag pointing to a non-canonical. Both of these things can cause problems, and this is why. There's a lot of power in consistency. So when there are consistent URLs from the home page to the category, subcat to the product or item level, when a search engine spider comes through and hits those URLs in a way that's very consistent, and the navigation internal links and the external backlinks and the canonical tags and XML files, when all of those line up, that can be really powerful. So that's why a canonical strategy that includes URLs outside of the internal link profile is a sort of a lost opportunity. It's a lost opportunity because it's not consistent. The signals are not consistent. You're saying one thing in your internal link profile, and you're saying another in your canonical strategy. So before we jump into pagination, I want to pass it back to Ryan and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, as we're going through this, everyone feel free to ask questions through the questions interface there. Most of the questions I think that have come in so far are around some topics we're going to be addressing here shortly. So I think we can kind of keep moving at this point.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ryan. And what I'll do is I'll just pause after every topic here, and pass it back to Ryan, and we can address any questions that come in. So please feel free to ask questions as we go here. Pagination, obvious. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. One question did come in about the canonical consistency, and you talk about how, how powerful it is to make sure that that's consistent throughout. Can you extrapolate on that a little bit, and then specifically how would you start to estimate kind of the uplifts from that consistency?
So yeah, just briefly, signals like link canonical tags and XML sitemaps and actually a signal, an internal link profile is a much stronger signal than both of those things, which are really hints. Those kinds of signals work best when they sort of validate or confirm other signals. So link canonical tags are not a silver bullet in that they work by themselves to tell Google or Bing, hey, this is the actual URL that I care about, my website cares about. They don't work that well as a silver bullet. They work well as a validation or a confirmation of other signals. So that's the key, is to think about consistency and uniform presentation in all those different hints. And it's one of the things that works best in our experience. Does that answer it? And then and thinking about lift, it's hard to put a projection on something like a canonical strategy, because what that is more of an approach, a general strategy or approach to your SEO program. But I would say that you will see, let's say that a site it's a big site and it has a lot of inconsistencies in its internal signals, and you go through the process of clearing those up, and you end up at a point where you have a consistent link profile and canonical strategy and everything. You're probably going to see on the order of 10 to 15% lift in organic traffic at least. That would be a very conservative estimation. But it also depends on a lot of factors. Every site is different.
Great. Thanks, Adam.
Okay. Cool. So let's go into pagination. Obviously, a big topic for SEOs everywhere when it comes to technical SEO. There are two basic approaches. There are a lot of different approaches that you can take to this and some nuances, but let's put them in two basic categories. One is the view all, where any page or that is a component of a paginated series rel canonicals back to the view all. And the key is that the view all page should load very quickly, and that it should contain all or nearly all of the data in the series. And these they're very elegant in that it's simple. You rel canonical everything back to the view all. We have found our clients to have difficulty implementing these because of a couple of reasons. One is view alls can be just massive if you've got thousands of products in a category, and that makes a slow user experience typically. Another is that a lot of companies do not prefer the view all. Companies, in our experience, and this comes from merchandising teams too, as well as content teams and front-end teams, they prefer to not use a view all by default. They prefer to use a view all as an option. So if that's the case, rel prev next is something that works really, really well. And you can think about rel prev next as a way to tell Google that a paginated series, that every single component page in that paginated series belongs together as a family. And they therefore share equity across, indexing signals across. They don't necessarily do anything with straight duplication. So you still need to use rel canonical tags on those pages so that you don't end up with duplicate versions of those component pages. But this works really well in our experience. We used to recommend sometimes using no-index follow, meta no-index follow on those paginated pages, but we no longer do so because we're finding Google handling those just perfectly fine. The thinking was use no-index too so that you prevent Google from showing, say, page 6 in the search results instead of your preferred, page 1 ranking page. But in our experience, that's not really a problem anymore. So some of the problems that we see is the way to think about rel prev next is that it's not for duplication. It's truly for paginated series of pages. So we see sometimes companies not using a self-referencing canonical because they say, okay, well, rel prev next takes care of this. But it doesn't. So here's an example. you've got pages 2 through, in, whatever. On page 3, the URL it ends with the session ID equals 9. The actual canonical of that URL is just /page3, PG3, but there's no self-referencing canonical tag on that, and that's a problem because, yes, relprevnext sorts that URL into a whole series just fine, but it doesn't do anything about the potential duplication of that URL page 3. The other thing we see a lot are sort of multiple versions of paginated URLs, so like parallel series of pages. So here's an example. You've got your page 2 and on, and the link rel prev points to the page 1, but it has this random tracking tag on it, and every page in that series has random tracking tags. But there's also another paginated series that does not have it, and each of those is marked up with relprevnext. And that's a problem because you end up with multiple kind of paginated series of pages when in fact they're actually the same series of pages. So just make sure that those are handled appropriately. One more tricky thing with this is that when you use relprevnext, they shouldn't be the actual canonical URLs. The relprevnext URLs that are referenced should be the actual URL that is showing in the URL bar, which means it can include parameters on it and stuff, because Google needs to understand, it needs to see those key value pairs so that it understands how those are part of a paginated series. And then you use the rel canonical to handle the duplication. That's a little bit of a nuance there that we often see skipped. So I'll stop there. That was a lot of canonical talk, and see if there's any questions.
No, I think that's definitely an area where there definitely are a lot of questions. One of the questions we have is, as you're talking about this, is there a suggested URL character limit when you're thinking about this, of what the canonical pages should be? Is there a high end, I guess?
Yeah, good common sense here is best. Really, really long URLs tend to score more poorly, generally speaking, than a shorter URL. So the shorter and more compact the URL, the better from a scoring point of view. From a crawling point of view, Google can crawl very long URLs without a problem, but the longer they get, I think the more problems you tend to run into. Not necessarily in the character count, which I think there are limitations there. You probably don't want to get over, I don't know, 500 characters or something like that, but more in the parameters added. So if you pull parameters that are added onto a URL, after a while it's going to cause complications in crawling. So, again, it's kind of a common sense thing. Just keep them as short as you can and as clean as you can.
Great. And you referenced talking about the URL that you have in the URL bar as it is. Is there any reason that why wouldn't you wouldn't want that to be the canonical version of the page? Is that the ideal scenario, is to have that be the canonicalized version of the page that actually shows up in the URL bar?
Yeah, I think so. If you can do that, if you can do that at your company, great. Often what happens are you've got paginated URLs that include parameters that don't make them canonical. They may track, from, hey, this user, clicked here from over here, and that kind of stuff ends up in the URL. But yeah, if you've got a situation where the URLs that are presented are canonical, and that's awesome. I mean, that's great. It's more of a case where if you've got URLs that are presented that are not canonical, those should be referenced in relprevnext, and you should use rel canonical tags to sort the dupes. But if you're already presenting canonical URLs, you're ahead of the game.
Great. Yeah, I think it's just so much depends on the. Yeah, I think so much depends on the platform that people are using and how it's been set up. One last question on pagination here. What do you say about Ajax? Would you recommend considering Ajax, or is there actually indexing value in having the different pages there and the different URLs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's different ways you can handle this, and you'll see some stuff out there. Target uses page anchors, so they'll put a hash on there. It's not, I think it's with JavaScript. They'll add a hash to the end of the URL, and then you'll page through that way. So the cost here is that if you're using you're using Ajax or HTML5 with infinite scroll or something like that, you have to think about the SEO implications that the crawlers may not get to the products or items listed on the deeper pages because they're not going to see any of that stuff. Now, if you used HTML5 with push state, which is preferable today over SEO for Ajax, then you could absolutely get around that, where you could have pages and pages of stuff, and then you could have actual static-looking URLs that Google could crawl. So that could work. But Ajax, typically, it's a great user experience, super fast. It's still a huge problem for crawlers because they can't see any of that content. And so you're going to have to find a way to get a crawler into those products that are listed, say, on page 7, 10, etc. And that might be a workaround that needs to be scoped out as you do that.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Handling duplicate content. So this is a little bit of an obvious one, but I like to use this as an example, is that robots text typically isn't the right choice when you're dealing with duplicate content. So I use the Walmart example here. Their robots text on their secure version of the site was set to disallow. This has been fixed since then, so it's okay to use it as an example. They're doing it right now. But what the problem with this is that it's basically a brick wall between all that duplicated content, as far as the search engines see it, and the search engine itself. So what it gets excluded or disallowed in robots text, the search engine can never see. So what happens is, number one, it becomes a page rank vacuum or an equity vacuum because there's no equity flowing back and forth over or under that brick wall. And it also creates these suppressed listings. So you'll see when this was taken, Walmart showing, so this is a site :walmart.com, in URL a specific product ID or category ID. And what happens is you get these suppressed listings. In the middle there, you see two versions that are the secure version of Walmart that are robots text excluded out. So Google can know nothing about those URLs because it can't crawl them, so it can't show any snippet information. If they have links into them, none of that equity goes anywhere. It's just a dead end. So it's preferable to use redirects, to use rel canonical, to use no index, to use some other things. Robots text is a bit of a sledgehammer, and I'll talk more about that. The other thing we see a lot is mobile URLs competing with desktop. And here's another example of just a search, and using Walmart, their m. subdomain is showing up in desktop search. So this is a case where Google is duplicating results for Walmart and kind of confused. And in this case, we would need to use the mobile switchboard tags, which is, I'll talk about that more in a little bit. So that's another common one. So when we think about tools for duplicate content, there are basically 6 primary tools that we have in our little tool chest. Rel canonical, and as the first, rel canonical is sort of your do everything, go-to. It handles things very well. Google handles rel canonical nicely. One of the things that I keep hearing from them, though, is that pages really need to be equivalent, highly equivalent, for rel canonical to work properly. So Google is actually looking at the content on a page, the words, and comparing it to the content and words on a page that the rel canonical is pointing to. And if those are highly different, or if those are 50% different, 40 or 30% different maybe even, Google's going to discount that equity pass, and it's not going to work. They should be highly, highly equivalent. And that was something that Miley Oye from Google repeated again at SMX West just last week, or was it the week before? I don't remember. So keep that in mind. But a great tool. Bing still doesn't handle rel canonical well in our experience, and still doesn't support cross-domain. So secondly, meta no index. This is also a great tool. And the great thing about meta no index is that you can no index a page at the page level, and all the links can still be followed. And a meta no index page can still accumulate page rank and equity. It can still flow it on to other pages via the links on that page. So it's a handy tool too. Robots text is your sledgehammer, very powerful. It's not subtle at all. It's a blunt tool. Can be useful in certain cases. Just use it carefully. No follow at the link level can be another great tool. primarily because you can add it, at that link level, kind of sculpting things out, not page rank sculpting, but you can do things like sorts, different, show me 5, 12, 15, 30 products per page. Stuff like that that's really not needed for a search engine to follow can be kind of carved out, which is handy. Faceted navigation it can work well for. Fifth is the Webmaster Tools parameter handling stuff. Google and Bing both have these. They're great because the biggest reason why they're so great is because they don't require any resources on development or IT. You can just go in there, and you have to be careful because they're powerful tools, and you could certainly hurt the site using them. But you can go in and you can configure a lot of stuff that impacts the crawl for Google and for Bing, and you can do so without requiring anybody else's resources. So that's really nice. And they work quite well in our experience. One of the limitations is that with this, especially at Google, is that you need to have URLs that include key value pairs in order to use this appropriately. So if you have folders and very static-looking URLs without parameters, the tool is not going to be able to work. And then finally is rel prev next, as we just talked about. And just to kind of echo before what I said is, rel prev next should be thought of as handling pagination purely and bringing a bunch of components into a series, and not for handling duplication. That's handled by rel canonical. Okay, I'll stop there. Ryan, are there any questions about that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're thinking about e-commerce, if your category pages have multiple sorts, is it better to have the canonical pages pointing to the preferred sort, or just no index, no follow those sorts?
That's a good question. If you no index, no follow the sorts, you end up with a problem, and I should have mentioned this before, is that meta no index doesn't do anything to account for the crawl. So those pages still will and need to be crawled. They'll probably be crawled less and less as Google sees them if they have meta no index on them, but they'll still be crawled. So it doesn't do anything about your overhead there. I would either no follow sorts so that they don't get crawled at all, or I would use rel canonical on those. And with rel canonical, you'd be if anybody links to a specific sort that's not the canonical version, the equity will flow over to the canonical version of that. But also, Google has said that when rel canonical is on a page, and say it's highly equivalent like a sort would be, that page will get crawled less and less and less over time. The equity will pass, and the page won't be as big a problem in terms of your crawl overhead because it does get crawled less. So I would probably use rel canonical, or I would use no follow on those sorts.
Got it. Is there any thoughts around using parameter exclusion for the sorts?
Yeah, if you've got those URLs in key value pairs that would allow you to use Webmaster Tools stuff for them, yes, absolutely. Parameter handling can work well, and I would do that anyway. You might do a combination of things. So you might do parameter handling to tell Google what you want crawled and not crawled, and what's important and not. You might use no follow anyway to make that a very strong signal on the page on the sorts, and then rel canonical on all the sort URLs so that the duplication gets consolidated.
Got it. And kind of along that notion of, you had mentioned, whether when you're thinking about the products per page, is there an ideal? I know there's probably not an ideal number around the number of products per page or the number of sort options that you might have. Is there any guidelines to how you would think about that?
Products per page, number of sorts, and so forth. Merchandising often dictates, what this problem, in that in e-commerce they have their goals for product and what they want to push and what they want to put out there. In terms of how many products per page, if we're talking about the key thing to think about is not necessarily how many, but speed. And the faster the better, obviously. And it's a generous goal to hit because it should be even faster than this. But if your view all can be 3 seconds or quicker, you're looking good compared to the competition. In the the enterprise level e-com that we see, and this actually goes for enterprise level across the board, 6 to 7 second page load time is common, and that's about average.
Wow.
So if you're at 3 seconds, you're way ahead of the game. You should be sub 2 seconds to maximize user experience and maximize everything that you're doing. But hitting 3 seconds or faster gets you up ahead of the average. So I think about it in terms of speed. I think about it in terms of user experience. How many products do pages with lots of products convert better than pages with less products? One thing that we've seen is that search result pages often convert better because a shopper wants to see everything in front of them than say an advanced landing page that has a bunch of content, a few products, a lot of images that looks great and ranks really well on SEO. Those things are there's a little bit of tension between there. A search result page sometimes is what people want, even though a nice category landing page looks really great and ranks really well. So
right, that's why it's so key to make sure you're keeping everything you're doing has to be consumer first or customer first, and with an eye to what the search engines want to see as well. Because at the end of the day, it's all what makes the consumer happy and what makes it work.
That's right.
Great. We're already getting some good questions for the product variations. People are thinking ahead. So
okay.
Let's
cool.
jump into that.
All right. Let's go into faceted navigation. This is a big topic that could almost be its own presentation, and there's a lot of ways to handle this. The key to go in, we're going to show you one example with JP cycles. The key to this going in is it really depends on the specific site and the situation. But here's an example of how we handle it at JNP. We've worked on this on lots of different sites. I think faceted navigation is fantastic, and it's popular for a reason. It gives a lot of power to consumers and shoppers because they can do complex kind of Boolean searches by just clicking on really intuitive stuff to build those searches. So here's an example of a category page, motorcycle brake calipers and kits at JP Cycles. All the faceted stuff is on the left-hand side, as you can see. So here's what happens. Say I'm a visitor and I come in and I click on, okay, I'm going to click on price range. So motorcycle brake calipers and kits, the URL is built intuitively based on what somebody would normally search or the way you would intuitively think about that category, not in the order of the parameters that were selected. So here, motorcycle brakes, brake calipers, and kits were all selected, and so was a price range. The URL is built regardless of selection order, the same way every time. And then for something that what we call an overhead facet, here a price range is overhead, this doesn't have a lot of SEO value because people don't search for $0 to $25 in Google or Bing or wherever. Those get added as a parameter at the end. Here it's n equals 36367. And then rel canonical is used on the overhead facets to just rel canonical reference back to everything before that, to the actual canonical version. So, and you can do this by anything that's overhead and appended on, just add it as a parameter and just rel canonical back to that canonical URL. So here's another example. We were in that category, and now I've selected Brembo as the brand. So Brembo gets put forward. See where it gets put in the URL? It gets put back, so it makes sense. Motorcycle parts / Brembo / brake calipers and kits. Okay, and then I add in another price range, and I add in front, both of which JP Cycles is considering as overhead or not part of their SEO strategy. Both of those now are added in as parameters. N equals 363, the same one for the price range, or the same type of parameter, plus another 2800, etc. parameter that is the front brakes, and then rel canonical back to everything before the question mark. And that works really, really well. Another great thing about faceted nav is if it's built like JNP Cycles, you can use parameter handling here. And you can say, hey, just skip, don't crawl and don't care about, I'll go back, everything past the question mark there, because we don't care about that for our SEO. So that parameter handling works nicely. The basic strategy or approach is just to identify what is important and what is searched in your SEO campaign and what is not, or overhead, and then build your strategy based on that. Always force the canonical path regardless of selection order, and then build URLs intuitively, kind of how users search, so that you're building in a way that reflects the way somebody actually goes into Google or Bing and searches. And that's the skinny on faceted navigation. Any questions before we go into product variations and inventory?
I think let's kind of head into that section, and we'll have some questions.
Let's do it. Sounds like there are a bunch of questions here. First, variations. So there are a bunch of ways to handle things like color, type, size, price was one in Faceted, but let's just use color as an example. There are some different ways to handle this. There are 3 basic ways that we like for handling this. I'm going to run through those. The first is an example with online shoes. So for online shoes, different color variations get their own URL. And those URLs are allowed to rank in Google and in Bing, and their online shoes is saying our visitors want color, and they want to be able to search it, and then we want those people to come to us. And that's a completely valid approach. Here's another way to do it. You can have color-specific URLs, just like online shoes was doing. Zappos is doing the same thing. But Zappos is rel canonicalling back to a color-agnostic version. So regardless of the color, in this example it's purple suede mesh, rel canonical points back to this New Balance Classics M574, which is the agnostic version of that product. So the advantage here is that you don't have different color versions competing in search, but you have the ability for somebody to come in and bookmark or copy and paste and link and share this URL, this specific color URL that you wouldn't have otherwise. So that's a nice advantage. Best of all, I think, is how REI does it, and all of this is done in the interface. So you have one canonical agnostic URL that represents that product, and then all the colors are just shown in the interface via hover or via click without reloading the page. And that's most elegant because one URL is there, everything is naturally consolidated and doesn't change. When we think about inventory, this is another really big topic that is very interesting. There's a lot of ways you can do this. So inventory control is a product expires, a product comes back, it goes out of stock, it comes back, maybe it gets lost forever and never comes back. There's a lot of inventory churn. And here's some different ways and some ideas about this. At Zappos, we had the idea to do this dead products, where any product on Zappos that went away and was never coming back, we added to a section of the site called the dead products. And we said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to let those continue to rank and search, and then we'll put a lot of recommendations that are closely tied to them on the product page. So we'll say, hey, the messaging is this is no longer available, but try this other stuff. And what happened is this turned out to be a pretty big failure. It just didn't work. It really didn't do anything in terms of revenue. We thought it would, and it didn't. Another thing you can do, and this is what Walmart is doing in this example, is saying, okay, this product is no longer available, but we have a bunch of review content, so we're just going to use the review content and let it continue to rank. And this is a bad experience because this is the actual page. I took out all the navigation and stuff, but it's just really empty. There's no recommendations to other stuff. There's no conversion action to say, hey, you should do this. It just says this product is no longer available. Continue shopping at Walmart. So again, this is not an ideal way to handle this. Here's what we think that sites should do. Ideally, generate a product not here message saying we no longer carry this, and then recommend tightly related products. Now that's easier said than done. Recommending tightly related products can be hard to do. But if you can do it, it can be a great user experience, and it's a way to continue to capture traffic from those products that are gone and send them to inventory that you have and keep them as customers. Another thing you can do, if that's not possible, or it might be a combination of tactics, is you can 301 that out-of-stock product to a related product that you carry, or up a level to its subcategory. If you 301 to the subcategory, it's not an ideal experience. So there's going to be a cost associated with that. It might be a little bit startling for someone to click in on a product. Say they get there via search, and the search engine hasn't updated the 301, and they get 301 from what they thought was a product page to a category, and they say, what the heck? If that product comes back at some future point in time, you can 302 it to either the category right above that it belongs in, or a related product, and then just take away the 302 when it comes back. Another option is to 404 the page, and this is a very valid option. If you think about the way that users use the web, is when I go into Google and search or Bing and search, and I say, okay, I want this product. If if I'm coming into a website and that product no longer exists, I'd like to know about that. And so if it's a 404, I'm not going to have to worry about clicking into a site that actually doesn't carry the product, but I feel like I've been bait and switched. So I like 404s. 404s basically just acknowledge the fact that we're not going to be able to wring dry every last little drop of link equity that we have on our site. A 404 is an expected result in this case, and I think completely appropriate. Others you can do is you can use rel canonical tags. Sort of that would be the soft 301 strategy. Rel canonical, the out-of-stock item to a closely related item or subcategory. We've seen companies use meta no index. And the thinking here is, well, if we no index follow all the pages that, the product that is out of stock, we'll still get, if they have equity, we'll still get Google coming through, crawling them, and passing on that equity as a second-order effect through the links on the page. I think that's grasping a little bit. I think I would rather do something than keep a whole bunch of pages in the index that don't have any inventory, real inventory on them. Especially now in this era of less is more SEO. It's not about as many pages as you can put online in the index. It's about as many high-value pages as you can put out there. And then finally, something you should never do is 301 out of stock to the homepage. It's a very startling user experience. It's not a good one. There's nothing equivalent about a product or an item and the homepage of the site, so it won't work properly, at least as an SEO would think, by hoping that it would drive equity from that inventory or product page to the homepage. That won't work as you'd expect. So those are the general strategies. I'll pass it back to Ryan for any questions.
Yeah, so we talked about some of the product pages. What about some of the utility type of links, if you want to call them that? So thinking about track order pages, shopping cart, etc. Should those be no followed?
Yeah, I would consider shopping cart, login, utility type pages as you term them, as being not super important from a search engine standpoint, and they can be no followed.
Cool. So if you allow all of your faceted URLs to be indexed, maybe except for the overhead, how do you think about preventing index bloat? So for some people, this is going to, thinking about this, the fear is that they might add hundreds of thousands of new URLs to the index that way.
Yeah, you have to. There's some different thinking here. First of all, whatever strategy you take has to be undertaken with the thought in mind of the authority of the domain. So if you've got a very authoritative brand, you can get away with more here than you can if you're a smaller brand and less authoritative. That said, this is a great question because this is, as I said, it's the era of less is more SEO, not more is more. The key with the faceted stuff is that you don't want that infinite problem of just having infinite index bloat where you've got tons and tons and tons of different versions of stuff getting out there. It's identifying the important facets that are searched by your users that you want people to come to through organic search, and then optimizing those. And it may mean that the majority of your stuff is so-called overhead, in which case you're going to want to exclude that either with no index tags, with no follow, with no robots text as a last resort, with parameter handling, and so forth. But it's about just going into that with eyes wide open as to what you can get away with on your domain and what's a good user experience, and optimizing the facets that are reflective of people's search to your site and what people are looking for. And if you're doing that and you're serving up the content that people are actually looking for, and you have hundreds of thousands of URLs, well, if it's valid and you're actually serving people what they're actually looking for, then it's valid. If it's quote unquote cheating in that you're creating a whole bunch of stuff that's overlapping and may not be high value and people may not be looking for it from you necessarily, then that's that judgment line. It's subjective. You're going to have to make that call yourself.
Great. Ton of great questions, everyone. Keep them coming. We'll try and get to one more here and then keep moving through.
Good.
Have you ever seen cases of where, so Google and Bing webmaster tools might be talking about that you have duplicate title tags because of parameters from sorts, page number, etc.
Yes.
but the parameters are being excluded, but they seem to show up. Is there should we be concerned about that if we see that?
Yes, and it brings up a bigger topic about Webmaster Tools in general, that it can throw quote unquote errors that aren't really errors, and often it will show you stuff like duplicate title tags for stuff you've already handled, be it parameter tools or whatever you've used. I think the key to think about this is that the tool sets are very useful, but they shouldn't be taken as gospel. And I know they're provided by the search engines, but they can often be, the data is not always consistent with what's happening in reality on the site. And it's also not a statement from the search engine of, hey, this is your reality in SEO. So we see things like Google crawling URLs that don't exist by finding them in JavaScript, even when there's not an href there, and building a URL, inputting forms to try to pass through forms, and then in doing that very aggressive crawling, throwing a whole bunch of errors. But those errors don't really exist because those URLs don't even really exist. Google just made them up because they were aggressively crawling. And those can throw you for a loop if you go into Webmaster Tools and you're like, whoa, look at all these errors here. And you start researching them and you say, hey, those URLs don't even exist. That's just one example of why it should be taken a bit with a grain of salt. It should be used, but you should consider that as when you use them. So I need to write a blog post about that.
Absolutely. Great. Well, let's keep moving through onto crawling and response codes.
Okay, let's talk about crawling and response codes. 500 errors. This seems like a no-brainer. You shouldn't have 500 errors on your sites, but it is a huge problem, especially at the enterprise level with SEO, is that sites will be throwing 500 errors and server errors of all types, and these can have a real impact on the SEO program. This is an example of SlideShare that I was just using the other day, and I thought, oh, that's great. I'll go ahead and use that in my example. We know when it comes to crawling that this has always been the case. Google crawls roughly in decreasing order of page rank, but we also know that every site on the web, Google itself, Wikipedia, Amazon, the biggest sites, the most authoritative sites, everyone has finite crawl resources. So what does that mean? What it means is that you've got, and this pie chart shows you've got a bunch of pages on your site that are dupes or overhead or just junk. They're not your money pages. They're not the pages that have value in your SEO program or in your company's strategy. What you do is unless you take care of that dupe overhead junk, that takes away from your crawl budget, and what happens is good pages don't get crawled enough, don't get in the index, and don't get the love from the search engines. So because of those finite crawl resources, it's really important to focus on your good pages and take care of the junk and give signals to the search engines to handle that appropriately. When you fix server errors, and this is an example from Webmaster Tools showing a whole bunch of different server errors that are 500s, and this site working hard to clean those up. The same exact date range correlated nicely with pages crawled per day, and the sizes, the total kilobytes downloaded per day. So Google, as those server errors get cleaned up, Google's doing a better job of crawling the site. And it really, really works well. So look at your site and make sure you're understanding what the response codes are doing, and if it's throwing a lot of 500s, then clean those up to the best of your ability. Another thing that helps with the crawl is this, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again, I think it's a professional disaster to use a site colon search and try to get an index count in Google or Bing and then copying that and storing that and tracking and reporting that, because that number is going to be random somewhat. It's going to change day to day based on the data center, based on the time, based on the search. It really has no meaning. But if you use XML sitemaps, and even better, if you chunk those up into different categories, like this is my category page, this is my brand page, this is my product type page, and then you track that, that can be very powerful. So if we looked at this example we used from a company we worked with a few years ago, and we just really liked how they did this. They've got all their sitemaps on the left-hand side. They've got when they're submitted and the index count there. They've got the count of URLs that have been submitted and then the index count, because Webmaster Tools will give you accurate indexation counts for XML sitemaps. And then they've got the percentage indexed. And there are 3 sets of these numbers, and if you look at the very bottom under total, when they started, they had about 20% indexation, and then on the far right-hand corner, 96% indexation was achieved as the third instance of this reporting. And this is the right way to handle indexation counts and report on them. And this is also the right way to think about crawling and giving Google and Bing, the right signals. Okay, oh good, you put some circles on those. Some crawling tips then. Fix server errors, especially 500s. It's really important. Really fast sites rule, so speed is king. The parameter handling tools can help a lot in crawl signals to Google and Bing. And then monitoring your indexation the right way with XML sitemaps, ideally with those separated into specific types. And I'm still a fan of using 304s. So when a page doesn't change, just return a 304 not modified and let the search engines know they don't need to pull this entire page down. They can just move on to the next page. Those are the primary tips for crawling. Any questions on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I think we have a few questions, but why don't we go ahead and go through site speed and mobile SEO, and we'll kind of put the questions together at the end because I want to be, I know that we're running towards the end, but we want to get to these questions as well. So.
Okay, I'll move quickly here. I'll go fast through site speed. Here are some quick tips. I think I have 7 tips on fast sites. Use gzip HTTP compression, and basically what that does is decreases the total file transfer size. Set a very far future expires header so that browser can cache a static object. Use the asynchronous GA code if you're using Google Analytics. They've had that since, I think, 2009 or early 2010, and it loads up the GA tracking scripts really, really fast. Link your CSS and avoid the @import. What that does is it allows clients to parallel download, so they don't have to wait for a download before starting another one for assets. And then specify a character set so browsers can begin parsing and executing everything much, much quicker. Empty IMG tags still create HTTP requests. So avoid and remove any of those empty IMGs, and always set image dimensions if you can and compress those images. That does a great job in reducing page load time. We have some resources for those at the end, which we'll get to. Let's talk about mobile. Globally, mobile is at least 13% of all internet traffic. What we're seeing at RKG is almost 20% of organic and direct traffic is coming through mobile devices. So it's obviously huge, and as SEOs, I'm sure you guys are working a lot in this area. So 3 basic ways to handle this. Some of this you'll be familiar with. Responsive design is something that's very kind of hot right now. I think it can be a great approach, but it has to be right for your business. It's not the only approach. It's just one. It has advantages in SEO because you don't have to change the URL, so it's a lot more elegant and simpler. You can also just dynamically serve mobile content off the same URL with the vary header, or you can serve 2 different versions with an m-dot, for example, using rel alternate and rel canonical. Rel alternate goes on the desktop version, and you can put that in XML sitemaps, and then rel canonical goes on the actual mobile URL in the HTML itself. Responsive design is cool because say this is my page, and I've got 6 kind of chunks of my page. As the screen size changes, the same content just reorders itself in different ways. So you basically serve the exact same HTML code, and you control the layout via CSS, just based on screen size. To do this right for Googlebot, Bing is not as current as Google, not surprisingly on mobile. Googlebot has to be able to crawl your JavaScript and CSS and images, and so don't exclude those in robots text. The advantages are obvious in that you've got a single URL. So when people, all the equity signals and indexation signals are consolidated by default. There's no redirection necessary, which is nice because it makes things much quicker. Redirects do introduce some latency, and it makes for more efficient crawls. The vary user agent header, as I mentioned, is for dynamically serving mobile content. And if you use a m-dot strategy, as I said, you can use your rel alternate and rel canonical, which is listed out there. Okay, guys, doing all this stuff right, the hard part is in execution, but you should be able to see a nice chart like this when you go to your higher-ups and report on your SEO. I'll pass it over to you, Ryan, for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. We have some great questions that came in. Thanks again for everyone joining us. We're going to stay and answer a few questions here. For additional resources on SEO and other topics, obviously, or maybe not obviously, rkgblog.com. We keep that nice and updated, lots of posts every week. For some specific articles from Adam, you can go to rkg.co/Audette, and it'll take you right to Adam's page of articles. Or you can reach out to either one of us or the company on Twitter as well. So a couple of great questions. One going back to pagination, if we could.
Sure.
When you mark up page 1, should you reference the last page as a rel equals prev, and have the pages loop, or should you not?
Great question. No, not necessary. So page 1 would just have a rel next, and then your final page would just have a rel prev. So it wouldn't be circular. Got it.
Good deal. And then this is a great question that's come up a couple of times actually before the webinar. And this is one, when you're talking about a large site, the first question is how do I think about subdomains versus subdirectories, for the same topics or different topics. And then the next part of that is how do you think about handling either the subdomains or subdirectories?
From an SEO standpoint?
Correct.
So if it was a perfect world and SEO could decide, on a company using say a subdomain versus a directory, I would typically go with something on the primary domain and not a subdomain, unless the content is strikingly different from the theme of the primary domain. Just because starting on a subdomain, if it's a new subdomain, you're starting fresh. And so you have to kind of start over like it's a new domain. It's not going to inherit any of the love from the primary domain. But often those decisions are dictated by strategies within a business, within a company. So it's kind of making do with the situation that gets presented to you as an SEO. I think going into it, eyes wide open. Generally speaking, if you've got content getting created on the directory, you're going to have advantages by that directory inheriting all the authority of the primary domain, and you're going to lose that with a subdomain. You have to build that fresh. So. And now, is the question more about duplicate content on those, Ryan, or?
Not necessarily. It was just kind of how to handle that structure and how to handle the technical SEO side of that. When one of the questions that's kind of getting back to the notion of products, so a lot of people have this issue, especially the retailers, thinking about there are thousands of different pages in the index, and there's a lot of product that are where the content from the product is being delivered by the manufacturer. So when you look across your competitors or other sites, they might have similar content. Is the answer there that you really have to go through and rewrite your own custom content to make sure it's unique, or how would you think about that?
All things considered, if you've got the same products with the same manufacturer supplied descriptions as everybody else, you're not doing a lot to differentiate. And in those cases, the strongest domain will win. So if you've got the same descriptions as Amazon, you're going to lose in that battle. The way to think about it is to add value in some way. Is that writing unique content for your products? Yeah, it could be, sure. That can be really valuable. Is that having good user reviews and being able to surface those well? Definitely, that's valid too. I think the idea needs to be how can we differentiate and make this valuable for our users in a way that our competitors aren't doing, even if we're using the same products. I would invest in unique product descriptions for sure. I think that can have a lot of value.
But it wouldn't necessarily penalize. So if there's certain categories where there are more products like that, it wouldn't necessarily penalize the other categories, right?
It wouldn't necessarily penalize you as a site to have the same product descriptions as everybody else. But if there wasn't much, say your site had the same product descriptions as everybody else, didn't have a lot of unique content otherwise, didn't have a lot of authority otherwise, you're not going to be able to compete well, and you're going to suffer in SEO. So it could be a problem in that case. If the site breaks down where a large portion of it or a significant portion of it is unique content, category content, whatever kind of content, blog content, any type of content, and you had the same product descriptions as everybody else, maybe okay. It's a matter of looking at that whole picture of where you stack up.
Great. Two more questions here. Let's. So going back to the notion of the subdomain. So just to make sure that we're understanding. So does the value of the main domain transfer to the subdomain? Does the subdomain inherit any of that value?
No. It's
Okay.
basically like starting with a brand new domain.
Okay.
Yep.
So not
and Google has changed on that time and time again. And right. The most recent iteration of Google is that subdomains do not inherit the value off the primary domain. And the reason they switched to that a couple years back or so is because people were abusing subdomains and putting, my key term dot my primary domain and doing that to a large degree, and it was working too well in SEO. So Google decided to close the loop on that one.
Got it. And for some of these enterprise level sites that we're talking about, that are going to have thousands of pages in the index, and we go back to that notion of canonical URLs and cleaning that up and getting rid of some of the duplication. I mean, is it something that is there a benchmark we talked about earlier that some of these things you can get 10 to 15% improvement? Is that in ranking? Is that what you would? Is there any guideline there?
There's no guideline to this is what you're going to get every time. It's very specific to the site and the situation. We've seen, often we'll fall around that 20% range if it's a big change to a site. That seems like a common area, but it could be 40% and it could be, 80%. I think the key with it is to just be really, really careful in your projections to set lower expectations and then just deliver way above those. And often if we look back at our work, we may have said, hey, we're going to expect like a 20% bump on this work, and we might see more like 120% bump, and that's great. Promise low and deliver high is a great thing to be. But I wish I could give you a number up for every one of those things that I talked through and what the potential lift is from those. But it's just impossible because every site is different, and there's no way to do that. It's an it depends answer.
Sure, and it gets back to that last graph that we showed, the upward line to the right at some
yeah.
slope.
That's right.
No,
your mileage may vary.
Exactly. Well, this has been really, really helpful, Adam. I thank you for doing this. I thank everyone who joined us today. I think we got to most everyone's questions. There might have been a few at the end, and we'll try to follow up with those. As always, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, or you could reach out to me directly, ryan@rimkaufman.com. But thanks so much, everyone, for your time, and look forward to talking with you next time.
Thanks a lot.